Now we're at a place where we can study this. We can study this pseudoscience, and then you can determine, is this real? Is it not? Are there mechanics to this? And this is what. All right. Today I'm going to talk about the hard problem of consciousness versus the autistic world, the world of the neurodiverse, the highly sensitive individual, and how the continued gripping onto this belief that consciousness comes from the brain and it's produced somewhere in the brain, even though we can't find that yet, is violent, is gaslighting to all the individuals whose lived experience includes things outside the body, the exteroceptive world, that from the default current scientism, overly dualistic world that says we are separate. I can hide out in my muggle suit and you are over there and I'm over here. And the only way we can communicate is from a distance with little mouth noises or visual things or just only with the five senses. That's actually violent. It's violent, and it disregards, and it's gaslighting. And it's not just violent to others, it's violent to you scientists and everybody who's living in that cul-de-sac, including myself. This is where I came from. And so I want to talk about that today, because it's time to start investigating the other option. So the option or the hard problem of consciousness basically is this: where does consciousness come from? Is all of this conscious and then the human experience bubbles up from within it? Or does consciousness come from inside the brain somewhere and we are the highest evolved conscious thing that's on the planet? It's kind of like we're at the top of the pyramid. All right. And where I'm going with this, and what all of my videos are going to show me working with people in a way that looks like it's pseudoscience. I've just got another video or a comment today about pseudoscience, and that's the same thing that I said when I saw this nonsense for the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time. It was like, oh, what kind of crap did I just get into? And then, in fact, I got a response from another well-known doctor out of Stanford. I sent him a video of this work a couple years ago and said, he basically responded, I was like, Craig, I was just going to dismiss this, trash can it as pseudoscientific rubbish. However, I've just had a couple experiences with psychedelics that makes me pause for a moment. So that's kind of where we are. It feels like as a culture, at least this first world culture, we're at a point where we're at a pause. Like, what's really going on, especially with all of these psychedelic experiences that are becoming normalized, right? Our grip is a little bit less tight and sure on what we are, and that we're 100% separate beings, that there's something else maybe going on here behind this veil. But how do we proceed safely into this world of this collective mind, this collective field? And this is where I'm excited to be entering the conversation, or continuing the conversation, maybe entering more in this public arena, because of where we are right now with technology. As much as people like throw technology and social media under the bus, what seems to me to be an amazing gift that comes along with it is how I've been working the last half a dozen years, is exclusively over Zoom calls or FaceTime or Zoom Live or whatever. Not Zoom Live, but I was going to say Instagram Live, but from a distance. So this stuff I've been showing on the videos where I'm actually showing images of me working with various people, but they're in my presence. This stuff also works over a Zoom call. In fact, maybe I'll put a link right here showing me doing that, or a video clip. I'm gonna come back down. I'm gonna focus right here. And that was another layer of mind-blowing to me. When I learned this stuff, it was just in person, and I had years of training with this, and many tens of thousands of dollars, and many tens of thousands of patient visits when I was doing this in a practice setting. And now I'm doing it online because I realized that it doesn't require physical proximity. Thought they were acoustic waves, subaudible acoustic waves passing between bodies. So it was the only way I could scientifically make it palatable for what I was doing from across space, because it's still weird. Then I figured, like, well, you're just a little boy in me is like, well, what if we, I wonder if this really works over a Zoom call. What would the world be if this shit worked from a distance? Right. You could tell where I was coming from. I came from a family that was very scientifically oriented, lots of doctors and scientists and such. So that's just the soup that I was raised in. Right. But then I came across this work. It's like, this stuff is amazing. And it was very validating to the part of my nervous system that is somewhere on the neurodivergent spectrum. And for me, what that means is I feel things apparently differently than many others do. And I got, mercilessly mocked and bullied for it as a kid, and I was weird, and that was that. I just figured that was, that was me. But where I'm going with this, and this is why I've developed this, this training called subtle energy mechanics, but it's not me that's developed it. This has all been laid out in yogic literature. There's the five koshas. There's koshas and nadis and bandhas, and those are all words, yogic words for the mechanics for how this invisible shit works. So some of the science is already laid out there for you scientists that want to study this stuff. In fact, I had an email exchange with Rupert Sheldrake, who's a biologist out of England who has been studying this stuff now for decades, and he was quite compelled. He said he's seen some of this stuff in person, but hadn't seen it done online. And I know that I'm not the only one doing this. I know a couple other people, and I haven't been doing any kind of an exhaustive search, but I know a couple people that are doing this and making a living at it. And so it's a normal thing in a small bubble of the world. And so I feel compelled to maybe spoon feed it to some of the scientists that are curious about this hard problem of consciousness and how you might set up an experiment that would give you something to give you a yes or a no, and then also give you a direction that you could start to figure out, to test and codify, if you will, or lay out a map for how can we play with consciousness at a distance. So we're talking about the co-regulation of the autonomic nervous system. And this plays a huge role in where we are right now, and have been forever, but right now in the world with trauma. As we know with Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory, that what we need for those of us, especially those of us on the highly sensitive neurodivergent autistic end with a nervous system that has a much higher percentage chance of slipping into a traumatized state, that it's really critical to have autonomic co-regulation. The problem there is autonomic co-regulation means the autonomic nervous system of that neurodivergent individual needs to be recognized for what it does and how it experiences the world, which isn't something that a neurotypical nervous system program can do. It doesn't actually recognize the neurophysiology of the highly sensitive person, right? But there are specific movement patterns and oscillations and spatial movement relationships between various parts of the brainstem and the spinal cord and the skeleton that can be measured and tracked and done so from a distance. And so here's my offer of the layout for you that want to test this stuff, so that we can get past the naming of the problem and the continued gripping onto this dualistic, violent narrative. So that once we can get past the problems, yes, wow, there's something else going on here, and we can play in this, which means we can set up experiments to show not only that it works, but we can start to figure out how it works. What are the subtle energy mechanics for this exchange from a distance? And what I would say is you test then the autonomic nervous system, and you can test it over a Zoom call. And so the way I do it is I get on the Zoom call with a client. I will shut off my camera and I'll shut off my microphone. So now I've blinded the study. They can't see me and they can't hear me, but I can see them, and you can sit right here next to me. We can set up another camera right here, and I'm not the only one doing this. You can do this with any of the people that are out there doing this work. But here's how you would set up the study. So now you've created a blinded situation. You take a client of mine that's maybe 1,000 miles away, who has done enough work with co-regulation with my nervous system that you can then set up whatever you want to set up, EMG up and down through my spinal cord and their spinal cord, so you can track in real time what's happening. Not only that I can consciously say, great, they're going to lift their head, they're going to turn it this way, they're going to lift their pelvis, they're going to turn it this way. Now you're going to see a wave move up through the spine or not. And so I can consciously tell you what's going to happen, but you can also track my autonomic movements and track theirs and measure it in time, measure it in what kind of movement correlation and mirroring, biopsychic mirroring, is happening from across space between us two, with obviously no exchange of information across the five senses. Okay. So part of what the critical reason for us actually looking at this right now is because if we're continuing to assume that consciousness only happens in the head and not in space in general, and if we're happening in space in general, then there's this, I'm going to say quantum, but I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm right now just saying I'm not a quantum scientist. But what I'm saying is we've got spooky action at a distance happening here. And if you took polyvagal theory, which shows the need for co-regulation of the autonomic nervous system, basically creating a wingman. Somebody goes down and you need a wingman to come down and co-regulate with a traumatized nervous system and bring them back into, organize and integrate their nervous system so they experience safety to the degree that safety is present, and emotion and clarity of thought and contentment in the moment. So there's not this hypervigilant, freeze and flight and fight and fawn need. Where was I going with that? I was going with, since that's the need, the co-regulation of the traumatized nervous system, if you can do it from across space, because we've answered the hard problem of consciousness, and we can see that we can actually access each other from a distance with doing something specific with our focus and our posture. Look at how broadly we can address the traumatized people. We can't do it if we're limited to consciousness just coming out of the brain and we're separate. We're really limited. But there's a way that we can test this, show that it's real, then start to work out with this new science of how we can actually start to co-regulate from a distance, and with tracking how do autonomic nervous systems actually entrain to each other from a distance, and actually starts to make sense. It starts to put answers a lot of problems that are still being worked with in science. And so I would say that one experiment, if somebody wants to do that, you're going to get your name up on a Nobel board somewhere. Zoom call, shut off the microphone, shut off the camera. So now we've got blinding, right? 1,000 miles away. Then you can hook up EMG, electromyography, whatever else you want to hook up to each body. And then I can tell you from here, and it doesn't have to be me. It can be somebody else that does this work. Lots of people out there doing this work, right? So I'm not the only one, thank goodness. And the need for this, for the traumatized world, especially the highly sensitive, the autistic world, people that actually experience themselves as the space and experience around them. Wouldn't it be a helpful bit to explain even some of the autistic experience where if you move something out of position in their physical environment, it's traumatizing to them. And right now, that doesn't make sense in our dualistic consciousness only comes in our head. But if their consciousness actually is the space and you go tweaking something in the space, you're actually tweaking their brain and whatever relationships they're maintaining that require the positioning of that thing. Then we can look at stimming. We can look at how does stimming out here create the world and safety and clarity of thought, and how does that relate to stimming when it's centralized, when you move that rhythmic energetic regulation behavior up into the spine from the distal portions of the skeleton. How does the world experience and the ability to actually subconsciously regulate safety, presence, distance relationship? Are those two different? If you centralize the stim or a stim shift, right? We just look at it. That's what dancing is. That's what athletics are. That's what playing a music instrument is. Right? It's just a nuancing of the stim. And if you create a stim shift, or you train the person to stim shift, they can actually change how their body is experiencing itself in space. Last thing I want to say is that again, I've just watched the Heidi Priebe video on the trauma of neglect. So the hard problem of consciousness, as long as we continue to grip to the consciousness coming from the brain, it promotes the ongoing trauma of neglect, because the people whose nervous systems actually experience themselves as space and are co-regulating pre-verbally from across space. The belief that consciousness comes just from the brain denies and gaslights that experience. And that's continued violence. And if you think about that, like if you don't want to be that person, but you believe consciousness is coming from here, you are that person. And you're not only are you being violent to those people, but you're being violent to yourself. And I can guarantee you that your relationships, your intimate relationship is suffering. Why is that? Because intimacy opens up when you start to play the game where you can feel each other from across space and you wake up to the mechanics of playing in that realm. Like, it's an amazing game to start playing. Like, what are the upsides? It's not just healing from trauma, but if our nervous systems are actually designed to play in the consciousness pond, some of your own personal problems actually start to, well, as Jack Sparrow said, I'll lend you a machete to your intellectual thicket. All right, some of the problems that you may have with your own trauma or your own shame because you've seen what you're actually capable of doing to other people, and you can't quite figure out how to undo that or undo those, the ramifications of some of those actions you've performed against others. Because again, like me and others who have come and have lived a long time in that cul-de-sac, wanting to be on a road where we're actually peaceful and happy and moving forward with others without hiding and trying to figure out, are we above them or them above us? We're trying to figure stuff out. Like, it's such a violent belief. Anyway, I'm ranting on now. If you like this stuff, please hit subscribe or click the bell, the things that the other people say, but that way you can be notified when I post another one of these things. And if you have trauma in your body, or this resonates with you, one of the things that I really resonated with, Heidi Priebe saying, and it's also something that I do, is if you're suffering from this trauma of neglect, you were born with a highly sensitive nervous system or somewhere on the autism spectrum, one of the things that we need is this autonomic co-regulation, but not on just a fundamental level where the provider actually still believes that they're separate. You need a professional provider that actually can intuitively connect and dance with you in the moment. That's how your nervous system needs to be recognized. That's the only way you're going to actually come home fully into the experience of being a highly sensitive, playful, autistic person without being afraid of some kind of diagnosis or treatment for something that's wrong with you. There isn't anything wrong, right? That needs to be fixed. And once it's fixed, then you can get to the good life. No, this world actually is built for you, and the scientific community currently even was listening to the great interview with Stephen Porges from polyvagal theory, and he still is believing, and this is really limiting this amazing theory. He's still believing that the impulses from the body come up through the spinal cord to the brain where the consciousness is. And I heard him say this today. I was like, oh my gosh, how much further would your theory carry if you recognize that consciousness is everywhere? Okay, Craig, I got to cut you off. You get going on your rants and then you just don't stop. So as a reminder, if you're into this stuff, you like talking about this, then please subscribe, please hit the bell, leave a comment. What are your questions? What's your experience with complex trauma? What has worked for you? What have your challenges been? Does this make sense if we actually had the field be conscious and that we're inside of that? Do you actually see the connection where that could make a huge pivot in your life towards the good, as well as the society that we're living in? And then also, if you find yourself struggling with complex PTSD or another type of PTSD, but the trauma response, that fight, flight, freeze kicks in, and you realize now that we're designed as relational beings and we need to then find mentoring from the environment where that wasn't given to you as a kid or in whatever trauma experience that you suffered, or yes, experience that you suffered that now you notice that you're still struggling with because you weren't fully able to come back home safety, content in the experience and the body, and that you need to have co-regulation from across space in the collective field, and that makes the most sense to you, right? And so my call to action, what made the biggest difference for me was I didn't even know that was a thing, and that when I was then worked on by somebody that did this work, it was a game changer. My personal life, my professional life, my intimate life, my parenting, all across the board. So now this is what I do. And I work with folks. It feels like something that you'd like to even investigate. We can look to see when the next I'll be doing regular live talks, be for an hour, so you can get on a call with me and see how it feels. How does your body respond to being on a Zoom call with me? Okay. Yeah, very good. Have a great day, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. What ends up being so potentially profound about working in a dyad, of working in two, is allowing two nervous systems to work together. And I think it was Peter Levine that said, trauma is an experience held in the tissues in the absence of an empathic witness.